Seltzer Kings
podcasts.
You're a guy who just wants to look nice. The kind of nice where you might get a nice compliment on the niceness of your nice new outfit. Good thing Men's Warehouse has everything from polos to jeans and, yes, suits, plus a team to help you find the perfect fit to make sure you look nice. Nice. Love the way you look. Men's Warehouse.
Verbo's last-minute deals make chasing fresh mountain powder incredibly easy. With thousands of homes close to the slopes, you can get epic pow, freshies, first tracks, and more. Find last-minute deals with the last-minute filter on the app. Book a private vacation rental now at Verbo.com.
I don't know, Gavin. Having Prince Andrew go live in his brother's garage doesn't seem like a punishment to me. Ass.
The following podcast contains...
Because cursing is becoming more and more common, you will leave with a better knowledge of curse words, and you will be proud that you are well educated.
explicit language.
Hello and welcome to the podcast that asks a simple question. When you and your boys wore matching khakis to the Riot, what the hell were you thinking? I'm your host, Dave Bledsoe, and this episode number 514, the Brooks Brothers Riot Daddy-O edition of the show, is part 2 of the 2000 election specials where we talk about the legal fight to see who would be president. Stay tuned. What the Hell Are We Thinking podcast is brought to you by My Little Lawyer Children's Clothing. Everyone wants what's best for their kids. What could be better for them than to grow up to be a high-priced lawyer? Get them started on the right path. Shop at My Little Lawyers. With a wide selection of silk suits, pencil skirts, and power tie vest combinations, and all the best footwear combinations from loafers to stiletto heels, sized and toddler to teen, you can dress your child for future success. Dress your kids for the future they deserve. Dress them from My Little Lawyer.
This is the story of how the Supreme Court decided the 2000 presidential election and effectively chose the 43rd president of the United States.
All the votes are counted. Right. All the votes are counted. Right.
What do we want?
Count our votes.
When do we want it?
Now.
Now the U.S. Supreme Court has spoken.
I believe things happen for a reason.
On December 12, 2000, the bitterly fought presidential election was finally settled when the Supreme Court ruled in favor of Republican Texas Governor George W. Bush over his Democratic opponent, Vice President Al Gore. So, how exactly did we get there?
In Florida now, they order the recount.
Recount after recount.
Automatic recount.
Manual recounts.
I once considered becoming a lawyer, and I think I've been a good one.
That seems unlikely.
Because I was attending college for free at the time, I thought I would graduate and then head straight into law school.
Dude, give up the dream.
You see, the way I saw it was I had experience in the law. I'd been a cop and all, and I like to talk, so being a lawyer would be a natural fit. I'd met a lot of lawyers over the years, and what they did just didn't seem that hard. Someone goes out and does all the work of investigating things, and all you as the lawyer have to do is get them to lie about the things they fucked up during the investigation on the stand when it goes to trial. But turns out I was wrong about a lot of things.
Seriously, you?
Like, did you know you have to take a test before they even let you into law school?
Everyone does.
I just assumed that if you could afford the tuition, they'd let you go, but no. You have to take a test first, and if you want to go to a good law school, you have to score really well and have good grades. Otherwise, you're just attending Big Ed's Law Academy in Pig Farm. You know, the one Barron Trump is looking into. Then, after you finish law school, you have to take another test before they will let you be a lawyer in each state you want to be a lawyer in.
What you have to do is pass the bar exam.
I mean, yeah, I'd heard of the bar exam. I just thought it was something different. Something that I could pass easily just based on my lived life experience.
Dude, you are an alcoholic. Whatever.
And then there was the whole choosing of what kind of law I wanted to do. I mean, I was sure criminal law was out. Most of the lawyers I knew worked in criminal law, and they didn't seem to like it very much. Something about the people they kept meeting working there, like cops and other criminals. Corporate law was off the table from the start. I mean, yeah, there's a ton of money to be made, but those fuckers work like dogs for the first 10 years of their careers, like 50-hour days, and frankly, that didn't leave a lot of time for drinking except on the job, which I hear is quite popular in corporate law. Personal injury law, that sounded too much like being a preacher to me. Shiny suit, slick back hair, taking advantage of people who aren't very bright.
Praise Jesus.
I settled on civil rights law. I mean, settled is the wrong word because I was just in my first year of undergrad. I chose it because it sounded like the sort of thing that if I'd told impressionable young women of the liberal persuasion, they might be inclined to fuck me.
Jesus Christ, Dave.
And, I'd help people and stuff. I'm not a monster. I'm not sure when I decided not to become a lawyer, probably around the time I had to drop out of college, but I'm sure watching the feeding frenzy of lawyers churn around the Florida recounts in the year 2000 probably had some small influence on my disillusionment with the law. Which brings me to this week's topic, the resolution of the 2000 presidential election, which was not done by the voice of the people but by 5 Republican judges on the Supreme Court, many of whom had been appointed to the court by the father of one of the candidates. Oddly enough, it was not the candidate that they ruled against.
That's probably a coincidence.
But first,
Not this shit again.
we need to talk about the Supreme Court, because in the earliest days of human society, the law was whatever the toughest motherfucker in the clan said it was. Did you hunt down and kill the Macedon yourself, but somehow Glork got the biggest piece? Well, if you wanted restitution, you had to fight Glork for it. Later on, as our social structures evolved, the gods got involved, and that meant who was right and who was wrong was determined by the gods. Sometimes this was done by auguries, like the flights of birds. Other times it was by the winner of ritual combat. But most of the time, it was just whomever bribed the priest with the largest amount of money.
The Lord works in mysterious ways.
Eventually, we got kings, and kings were the arbiters of the laws. They made them. They were the ones who decide the right and wrong of them. But the kings were busy men. Those maidens just don't swipe themselves, y'all. So the kings allowed smaller disputes to be settled at smaller levels. His Majesty did not want to spend an afternoon hearing about a goat dispute, so villages, counties, and the like were allowed to establish their own magistrates to settle goat-related matters. By the time we got around to founding the Republic of America, the founders had a rich tradition of English civil and criminal courts to draw upon, a tradition that stretched all the way back to the Roman Empire. So, while cobbling together the Constitution, they had a framework for what would become the American judicial system. The person with the most money wins.
Oh, groovy, smashing, yay, capitalism.
One of their big ideas was kind of one court to rule them all, and over court, a Supreme Court that would be the final say on the laws of this new country, and this court would be a co-equal part in the government. But, just sort of on paper, none of the Founding Fathers actually thought this Supreme Court would wield the kind of power it does today.
But they were all of them deceived.
Because in 1803, just a few years into the new republic, the Supreme Court told the President of the Congress that they, the courts, would be the final boss of the U.S. Constitution, deciding if a law was actually legal, constitutionally speaking. That must be said for most of American history. The Supreme Court has been reluctant to step in and exercise their power. It wasn't until 1857 that they did it again in Dred Scott, a decision declaring that black people weren't citizens, which, was regrettable for everyone involved, but mostly for black folks. And the court grew increasingly more willing to exercise its power, so that by the 1950s, they were routinely bitch-slapping the other branches of the government when the other branches were getting out of line. Chief Justice Earl Warren's court and the subsequent Burger Court did more to advance civil rights in 3 decades than all the other courts combined, and the Republicans hated them for it.
Commie bastards.
And starting with the Rehnquist Court, appointed by none other than our dear friend, Ronald Reagan.
He said it!
The increasing rightward path of the court has been working feverishly to undo every single advance of the court since the founding of the court, and maybe chuck a few inconvenient constitutional amendments along the way, all in the name of originalism, or what the original founders intended. But remember, what the original founders intended was that a few rich white guys held all the power in the nation, which is where we stand today. But the first time the court has openly demonstrated their intent to turn back the clock on a few hundred years, it was in the decision that settled the 2000 election, along with strictly partisan and honestly kind of legally dubious grounds. When last we left our heroes, the state of Florida was lowered slightly to George W. Bush by a margin of around 1,700 votes. By Florida law, any election, local or national, that is within 0.5% is automatically recounted. The procedure is usually running the ballots through the tabulation machines to see if the totals match within a reasonable margin. As I read the laws, each county can set exactly what that margin is, but usually it's within 1 or 2%. And so when Florida began an automatic recount to verify the totals, when this recount was complete, the margin of victory for Bush was down to 317 votes.
Wow, that's like a big difference.
Reactions to this rather large discrepancy were varied. From CNN, quote, The Bush campaign reacted immediately, calling on the Gore campaign to give up. The Gore campaign responded saying, "This is just the beginning." The statement from Karen Hughes, the Bush campaign spokesman, said, quote, "The vote count on Tuesday night showed that Governor Bush won Florida's election and a recount has now confirmed his victory. We hope Vice President Gore and his campaign will reconsider their threats of lawsuits or still more recounts, which could undermine the constitutional process of selecting a president and have no foreseeable end," unquote. And while, yes, Bush still had more votes, there were other issues. For one, at least 16 Florida counties didn't even bother with the recounts. Despite it being the law, they just decided,
But that seems like a lot of work.
and didn't do it. Now, admittedly, these counties were places where the vote margin was well beyond the recount threshold and certainly would not have changed. The Gore campaign was not worried about these counties, but they were deeply concerned about Palm Beach County and Miami-Dade County, where as many as 18 or 19,000 ballots had been rejected by vote tabulators as either undervotes, meaning no candidate was selected, or overvotes, meaning more than one candidate was selected, invalidating the ballots. This is because of the butterfly ballot that we mentioned last week. If you're just joining us and didn't listen to part one, welcome. That seems like a strange choice on your part, but okay. I'll give you the short version. Palm Beach County created a ballot that was incredibly confusing to the voters, resulting in mass confusion and a lot of votes for candidates for voters never intended to vote for. The upshot of this being many of the ballots in the heavily Democratic-leaning county were rejected by the voting tabulators as unreadable. For Gore, this had the very real potential to give him the state if they were counted. So he asked for a hand recount of the ballots from Palm Beach County and 3 other Florida counties, all in southern Florida. Florida law allows for automatic manual recounts if the vote is within 0.25% of 1%, and after automatic recount of the margin was 0.0009% out of 6 million total votes. Gore was within his rights to demand the manual recount, but counting 6 million ballots by hand?
It's a lot.
In every precinct in the state, election officials must physically inspect every ballot and compare it against the machine report for that individual ballot, and it must be done within 12 days of the general election. It is laborious, time-consuming, and above all, expensive. Florida law put the onus on the state for paying for this recount, so Gore offered a compromise. Instead of demanding a statewide manual recount of all the ballots, they would accept just the 4 southern counties, which coincidentally happen to all be strongholds of Democratic votes. And the Bush campaign immediately replied with, and that is when the lawsuit started. Every campaign has a staff of lawyers with an election law background because weird shit happens during elections. The duel between Burr and Hamilton came out of an election dispute. In 1872, one of the candidates died as the Electoral College was meeting, setting off a protracted fight about what to do with the dead man's delegates. Eugene Debs, the bête noire of capitalism, ran a campaign from prison where he was serving 10 years for the Espionage Act and netted over 900,000 votes. Everyone was positive that Dewey would beat Truman in 1948 to the point that the newspapers ran headlines to that effect, only to have Truman handily win the re-election. Having lawyers ready to deploy to clean up the situation quickly was money well spent. So both campaigns dispatched their lead lawyers to Florida. Bush sent former Secretary of State James Baker and Nixon hatchet man and sentient slime mold Roger Stone.
I know that name.
Gore sent former Secretary of State Warren Christopher, and they were each accompanied by a bevy of lawyers and joined by local party lawyers ready to duke it out in court. As the manual recounts commenced, the time remaining on the clock began to run down. The Florida Secretary of State Katherine Harris, who oversees elections in the state, was very friendly to the Bush campaign, probably because her boss, the governor of Florida, was the brother of George W. Bush.
Jam.
Harris was pressing counties to get their recounts done as quickly as possible before the recount deadline of November 14th, 12 days post-election. When that day hit, Harris graciously gave them about 6 more hours to the counters, extended the deadline to the morning of the 15th, pointed out that her office was actually closed at midnight when the deadline expired. So giving of her. So the Gore campaign sued to extend the deadline. The case was sent immediately to the Florida Supreme Court. This is important because the individual states are the arbiters of how elections are conducted in their state. It is one of the powers enumerated to the states via the 10th Amendment of the United States Constitution, which says that powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited to it by the states, are reserved to the states, respectively, or to the people. And there are no specific powers to regulate elections given to the federal government in the Constitution. The Florida court ordered the recounts to be allowed to be continued. The recounts themselves quickly assumed a circus atmosphere, as lawyers, television crews, activists, citizens began flocking to the sites where the recounts were being conducted. While the local citizens staged protests outside, some folks were more enthusiastic.
There, Christina. Certainly, and this is a case of simmering tensions boiling over. The Republican observers were angry because the recount had been moved to a smaller room, a room which could only hold 2 observers from each party. Well, that has since been resolved. The recount has been moved to a larger room, but the only ballots being counted now over undervotes. An impromptu protest by Republicans in the lobby of election headquarters after the count is taken into a tabulation room on the 19th floor, a room which could only hold a handful of observers. Democratic attorney Joe Geller booed as he emerges from the room.
Could I please have your attention? Yes. The board has just convened and determined that it's going to go back into session at 10:30 on the 18th floor. And they've asked that everybody cooperate. They suspended their proceedings upstairs, and they're going to reopen the proceedings on the 18th floor.
The so-called Brooks Brothers Riot was a very loud group of very white, mostly men, wearing business casual, shouting incoherently because they were being performatively angry about an extremely minor issue involving what specific room ballots were being counted in. The whole thing was organized by human-formed fecal splatter with a Nixon back tattoo, Roger Stone. The Brooks Brothers Riot achieved its twofold purpose, delaying the count and intimidating the people doing the counting. And though their claim was that they wanted every vote counted, that the rioters all consisted of Republican apparatchiks and lobbyists, the veracity of that claim seems a little dubious to me. When the local police were called in to restore order, several officers were punched and kicked by the so-called protesters, probably because they didn't have flagpoles or bike barricades to hit them with. Of course, no arrests were made. We're talking about white people here. The images of the Brooks Brothers riot splashed across the news and demonstrated to the GOP that if you can't win by persuasion, try a touch of violence. The logical culmination was, of course, in January 6, 2021. And I should also note that more than a few of these rioters wound up getting jobs in the Bush administration, which we were wondering what the campaign's position on them using intimidation violence to achieve their goals might be.
Oh, now, no, it ain't. It ain't no problem at all.
Making matters worse for the Gore team, a large tranche of overseas absentee ballots arrived after the election, but within the window to be counted. These ballots, the majority of whom were cast by active duty military members, a demographic that tends to skew rather Republican. And speaking as a veteran, if you shake hands with a U.S. military officer, you are almost certainly shaking hands with a Republican. Senior NCOs tend to be a bit less solidly GOP, though the majority are. And the regular enlisted troops.
Sometimes we vote.
No, we don't. Maybe it was youth, maybe it was apathy, and there was certainly no effort made to get out the vote amongst the troops, because who the fuck knows what we might do. Pointing out that my first time voting after I left the service was for Nader, so any kind of shit could happen. This was the batch of votes that would put Bush firmly over the top in the vote count, and there was talk of challenging their legality. Now, Gore never so much as hinted about doing this, but that did not stop the GOP from lying and claiming that this was exactly what he was going to do. They were working overtime to delegitimize Gore by any way possible. The recounts were further slowed by the very nature of the task. Each ballot had to be physically examined by hand by 3 people: a county election official, a nonpartisan position responsible for tracking and securing the ballot, marking its status, and the determined result of the hand count, and the other 2 people, one Democrat and one Republican, then had to agree on what the voter intended to do on the ballot. In the case of a cleanly punched ballot, this was easy, but there were literally thousands of ballots where the intent was muddled. It was all about the Chads.
Chad? Who's Chad?
From ABC News in 2000, quote, "What is Chad? Well, it's a tiny scored portion of a paper ballot voters punch out using a small stylus to indicate their preference for a candidate. If a Chad is punched completely out of the card, counting machines register each hole as a vote. But sometimes these tiny pieces of paper stay partially or completely stuck to the ballot, which may make it impossible for the machines to read them. Hence, the controversial recount of thousands of ballots in several Florida counties that could decide who wins the presidential election. There are half a dozen different varieties of Chad, including pregnant Chads, dimple Chads, tri-Chads, swinging door Chads, and of course, hanging door Chads. A hanging door Chad, for example, has one corner still attached to the ballot. A dimple Chad is indented, but still fully attached. Chads were punched and partially punched all across the nation on Election Day, as several states use the punch card voting system. But Floridian Chads are particularly pertinent as the election officials prepare to recount by hand, one by one, more than 400,000 ballots cast in Palm Beach County, unquote. Hour upon hour, multiple teams of 3 stared at flimsy pieces of computer-read cardstock, a technology already half a century out of date. And why was it still in use in the year 2000?
Very, very chic.
The two overseers had to agree on what the voter intended. Was the hanging Chad for Buchanan a sign that the voter realized their mistake and stopped short? Was the dimple for Bush a sign that the voter thought about voting for him, but then decided not to vote for anyone? Was the pregnant Chad pushed all the way up and not completely a sign the voter did decide not to vote for, or a sign that the voter intended to vote for a candidate and simply didn't push hard enough? Was the hanging Chad a sign of voter error or a sign that the cardstock was simply too thick to break cleanly? And it wasn't like you could ask the voter. That would effectively be doing the election over, which is what the voters of Palm Beach County wanted. But how would that even fucking work? Was it legal? Did they have enough time to do this before the votes had to be certified? That the recounts didn't devolve into fistfights in the counting rooms was a miracle. And so the count continued deep into November. Thanksgiving came. The counting continued after Turkey. All the while, the lawsuits mounted as the campaigns sued one another and the public sued the county and the state. Through it all, Gore had swept his fights in the California Supreme Court. In every case, the state's highest courts had ruled to keep their recounts going, but they did set a hard end date based on when the electoral votes constitutionally had to be submitted in Washington, D.C., December 14th. Despite this, the Florida Secretary of State Harris decided to take matters in her own hands and certified the vote, ending the recounts with most of Miami-Dade and Palm Beach outstanding. So Gore went back to the Florida Supreme Court, and that's when the Bush campaign played their trump card. No pun intended. They went to the United States Supreme Court. The U.S. Supreme Court had already sent back one case that was filed by Bush to the Florida Supreme Court with a message, fix this shit so we don't have to. But kind of ignoring that Florida was consistent in their rulings, and Florida was the person or the people that were supposed to determine those things. SCOTUS in 2000 was a 5-4 ideological split, with the conservatives holding the majority and Justice Anthony Kennedy being sorta, kinda, if you squint at it from a distance, a swing vote. All 5 conservatives were either Reagan or Bush the first appointees, while the 4 liberal justices, only Ginsburg, came out of the Clinton-Gore administration. Without digging deep into the weeds, SCOTUS determined on December 12, 2000, by a 7-2 vote, that the mess of a recount within certain counties being recounted and other counties being not counted, not being one set standard to say which ballots should be counted and which ones shouldn't, violated the 14th Amendment of the Constitution for equal protection to all, which, okay, fair. But the controversial, the ideological split, and the decision that ended the recounts was a 5-4 decision that no fix was possible in the time left remaining to correct the 14th Amendment issue, because the GOP Florida legislature wanted to wrap everything up with Bush ahead, and, Christmas was coming, so the recounts had to stop. The votes would be certified where it stood, with Bush holding a 572-vote margin of victory. Left with no other recourse other than storming the Capitol on the day of the Electoral College count, Gore conceded the election. He probably did this because hanging the Veep, which is what you do when you storm the Capitol to overthrow election, beat up cops, and threaten Congress with violence, wouldn't really work because Al was the Veep and he would have had to, hang himself. So Bush got Florida, America got Bush, and we're living with the consequence of that Supreme Court decision. A decision that the conservative majority made very clear was not legal precedent and only applied to this one very specific case. It should never, ever be used for any other case like this ever again. We mean it. We mean it. We swear to God, please don't ever do this again. We just really wanted Bush to be president. So, I hear you asking.
We weren't.
If the Supreme Court gave Bush the election, who really won Florida? Well, CNN said in 2015, quote, months after the United States Supreme Court delivered its ruling to stop the statewide hand recount in the Sunshine State, media and academic organizations conducted their own studies of the disputed ballots in Florida. Taken as a whole, the recount studies show Bush would have most likely won the Florida statewide hand recount of all the undervotes. Undervotes are ballots that did not register a vote in the presidential race. This goes against the belief that the U.S. Supreme Court handed the presidency to Bush or took it away from Gore. The studies also show that Gore likely would have won a statewide recount of all undervotes and overvotes, which are ballots that include multiple votes for president and were thus not counted at all. However, his legal team never pursued this action. The studies also support the belief that more voters went to the polls in Florida on Election Day intending to vote for Gore than for Bush, unquote.
So we don't know who actually won.
No. All we know is that when the counting was done, Bush was up by 527 votes out of 5,963,110 votes cast. But remember, not a single one of those 5,963,110 votes actually meant anything because your vote doesn't matter. The only count that actually mattered was that said that Bush won the election by 271 electoral votes to Gore's 266 because you, pot friends, are shitty little peasants and should have no say in who is running your country. And on the positive side, hey, Florida drove a massive modernization in how we vote in America. I mean, not modern like getting rid of the antiquated racist contraption of the Electoral College, but we got cool new voting machines. In 2002, the Help America Vote Act provided funding to the states to modernize their voting machines so Chads would not determine future elections. Fuck Chad. Today, optical scan technology is the dominant system. You fill in the little circles and you run that through a reader. Electronic voting machines are widespread, but after the 2020 elections, confidence in those systems are shrinking based entirely on lies and propaganda, to be sure. But I suspect optical scans will remain the dominant method, even though they can lead to under and over votes as well. And there's always talk of seamless internet votings, but I suspect that is just a long way off in America, assuming, that we ever have a presidential election ever again. There are any number of counterfactuals debating the difference if Gore won or if Bush won. Would 9/11 happen if Gore won? Probably. And the war of Afghanistan would definitely happen if that did. The war in Iraq? Nope, that never would have happened. The botched response to Hurricane Katrina was probably a little better since Gore was more likely to put a competent person in charge of FEMA rather than an old drinking buddy. The 2008 financial crisis definitely still happens. Those seeds were planted during the Clinton administration, and the recovery and lack of accountability of the people who actually did the crimes, that's just the same. That was never going to change. Election 2008 probably would have ran differently. I'm not sure that Obama would have ran after a 3-term Democrat White House because that's a lot of terms for the Democrats to hold. I think he would have waited, and I think that would have been a Hillary McCain election. McCain probably would have won because, again, 3 terms for one party in the White House is a lot. I suspect Obama would have run in 2016, and Trump never would have run at all. Again, this is just my opinion based on some speculations I've read. And I'll die on the hill of the 2000 election, paving the way for Donald Trump and all that he has done to this nation. But he wasn't preordained. That was a reaction to Bush's incompetence, Obama's skin color, and the long, slow stride into oligarchy that began with Ronald Reagan. But again, this is just me spitballing. What I do know is that the election of 2000 broke America's faith in elections in a way that's never been truly prepared. Before it happened, the idea that an election could be contested existed, but the methods used to win the election, particularly the Brooks Brothers Riot, would have been unthinkable. That an election could be contested by force was antithetical to the idea of America, and it was like that until it wasn't, and it worked. There is a dotted line from 2000 to 2021, particularly January 6th. But the real problem is that there is going to be a thick black Sharpie marker line that is drawn to future violence when the right loses again, all because of a bad graphic designer and outdated technology, and a Supreme Court acting in partisan interest and not the best interest of the people. But you know what? I'm sure it'll be fine. I'm sure it'll be fine because God fucking bless America.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can find options that fit your budget and potentially lower your bills. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
Chronic spontaneous urticaria, or chronic hives with no known cause. It's so unpredictable. It's like playing pinball. Itchy, red bumps start on my arm, then my back. Sometimes my legs. Hives come out of nowhere. And it comes and goes. But I just found out about a treatment option at treatmyhives.com. Take that, chronic hives. Learn more at treatmyhives.com.
That is it for the show this weekend for part 2 of the 2000 election. I didn't really see this topic going for a two-parter when I thought it up, but like a chubby girl in tight jeans, once you get them open, there's more in there than it looked like from the outside.
Dave, no!
We are trundling into the holiday season and the end of the year, so gonna be honest with you, you should expect less new content, not because I'm just torpid from Turkey, but we are also retooling behind the scenes for our theme shift come January. More on that later. But you know what? You should kick us $1 anyway. Someone's got to pay for the turkey. Do that at patreon.com/whatthehellpodcast. Do all the things that Jeremy tells you to do in the closing credits, or no cranberry sauce for me, I guess. And so for me, Dave, who's that whispering in the trees? It's 2 lawyers for the GOP Bledsoe, producer.
Who's your daddy? Yes, I am. No, I'm most not. I'm no one's daddy. I have no children whatsoever. I want nothing to do with this.
Gavin, and all the fictional chads on this show, we want to say, if you see a Brooks Brothers riot, you just run. Just run away from it. You don't be around chubby white guys in khakis. They're dangerous. We'll see you all next week.
What the Hell Were You Thinking stars Dave Bledsoe and features Gavin St. James and several fictional minions. The show is produced by Kimberly Steele and a part of the Seltzer Kings podcast network. You can find more information on the show on their website, whatthehellpodcast.com, or on Facebook as What the Hell Podcast. Thanks for listening.
I have no ending for this, so I take a small bow.
Blah, 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 Tipper Gore.
Seltzer Kings
Podcasts.